Hi guys, Mrs. Wallace again. I'm going to try to keep this a little bit shorter so that way you can get some of the highlights of the spread of the Reformation, looking to just kind of touch on some of those case studies that you did in your notes, and that way see if there's something that maybe you have additional questions on. And as you think more about some of the questions related to religious unity or religious diversity and the role of the state in religious affairs and things like that, those are ways that you can kind of use these various models of where the Protestant Reformation kind of is set up and some of the differences. One of the things that we would see with Calvinism, there's a couple of ways in which Calvinism spreads. It does have a community in Geneva, Switzerland, and Switzerland's kind of an interesting place because it's not dominated by one particular monarch, and even local political leaders didn't necessarily have a lot of power. So it becomes like a political vacuum, and it's like the perfect space for the setup of a church. And John Calvin was French, and he was not, his ideas were not adhered to in France at all, and he's actually removed from the country. So he's kind of a heretic, in the beginning in France. So he establishes some of his religious following in Geneva, Switzerland. And Geneva, Switzerland becomes, in a sense, this religious community led by the consistory. So there is this kind of strong moral kind of leadership that is based on this model of Calvinism. This model of Calvinism is much more austere than Luther's model. So some significant differences between Calvin and Luther exist. Luther, for example, was somebody who believed that one could have some activities in services involving song. There was a great deal, Luther was even known for, drinking beer, like certain activities that didn't necessarily impede one's religious beliefs. In Calvin's model, it's a much more austere thing. Anything that was seen as too much like reminiscence of Roman Catholicism is removed. So we see Calvinist churches much more plain than, say, a church that is, Roman Catholic or even Lutheran. We see Protestants in general not adhering to things like stained glass windows or a lot of religious visuals or saints or things like that. Luther takes that to some degree. Calvin takes that to a much greater degree. He even has individuals who are pastors, not wearing like religious garments in the same degree as what was previously kind of considered appropriate attire in Roman Catholicism. So like lots and lots of kind of visual things and songs, dance, things like that are removed from the Calvinist belief system. So very, very austere, kind of only basic, things that are connected to the Bible are part of their religion. And this will also spread as a model to Scotland in the form of Presbyterians. English Puritans will become kind of the minority religious group in an Anglican England. The Dutch Reformed Church, still kind of present in our area, but the Dutch Reformed Church is in the area of like modern day Netherlands, and French Huguenots. Okay, so all of these groups would be considered offshoots of John Calvin. Okay. And they all follow Calvinist beliefs, as do the Puritans who come to the New World and set up in Salem and other places in Massachusetts originally. This is a part of the way in which, the propaganda, so there's an image of John Calvin on the left, and then John Calvin kind of as a fish and as a monstrous face. This use of propaganda, happens throughout the Reformation period, between Roman Catholics and between various Protestant groups. This is kind of a description of the way a Calvinist church would be developed, 4 bare walls and a sermon. Okay, and the sermon, the pastor's sermon, was a great deal of attention as part of the Calvinist belief system. What we see happen in England will become a little bit different. Sorry, let me go back to that. This is an image of Henry VIII, and Henry VIII, for some time, is actually a very big defender of Roman Catholicism. During the time of Martin Luther and the 95 Theses, and some of that, Henry VIII will actually call Luther the devil, and he's seen as kind of given the title of defender of the faith. So originally it appears as if Henry VIII is going to be really connected to Roman Catholicism. Of course, we know this not to be the case. Henry VIII, who eventually will have in the upwards of 6 wives, is originally married to Catherine of Aragon, who is the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, and the aunt of Charles V. Okay, so if you think of Charles V in the Holy Roman Empire and essentially acquires Spain because he's the grandchild of Ferdinand and Isabella, his aunt is going to be married to Henry VIII in England. So this is very much a family affair, and relationship with Charles V is kind of important to know about. Henry VIII wants a male heir in 1527. Henry VIII decides that Catherine of Aragon is not going to bear him a male heir. She does have a daughter. The daughter is Mary. It's the only child she has, and she gets too old. She's basically not going to have an heir because she's, out of age. And so Henry VIII has his eye on Anne Boleyn, but she will not be with him until he is able to annul his marriage. So he sets out to annul his marriage. This has a whole bunch of political connections to it, okay? And without getting into every single part of these, kind of political affairs, there are going to be people who are going to take sides on this. Henry seeks an annulment. Pope Clement VII delays on this. And the reason he delays is he's kind of in a pickle. If he gives Henry VIII the annulment, then he's going to tick off Charles V, okay, who is the nephew of Catherine of Aragon, and then that's going to bring all kinds of problems. If he doesn't grant the annulment, then he's going to have, Henry VIII not on his side. And so there are some interveners in this within England itself. Thomas Cromwell, perhaps most significant. The bottom line is Henry does not get his annulment, but ultimately does become the head, literally the head of the new Church of England, and he breaks from the Roman Catholic Church. He does marry Anne Boleyn and has a daughter by the name of Elizabeth. Okay, the Act of Supremacy is really the key piece of legislation that comes from Parliament. Henry is declared the supreme head of what's called the Church of England. It's also referred to as the Anglican Church, and it becomes the official state religion of England. It still is to this day, despite the fact that most people in England are not part of the Anglican Church. Around the world, the Anglican Church is often referred to as Episcopalian, if you've ever heard of that. There is, however, this interesting thing, because you question maybe why is it that Henry VIII's declaration doesn't just lead to full onslaught revolution in England. A good number of the people are a little bit concerned about the role of the Roman Catholic Church. There had been already reforms requested by people in England, so a good percentage of the population is perfectly happy with seeing Roman Catholic Church authority leave, and Henry VIII does do some economic things where he takes over all the monasteries in the country, and some of that money ends up in his own treasury and ends up being shared kind of with the people of England. Some of it doesn't, but there is a little bit of argument that some of the lack of taxes going to the Roman Catholic Church appeases some people. Of course, there are going to be groups that are going to have some religious concerns. For most of the people of England, the Anglican Church is not terribly different. It's likely, arguably, more Catholic than it is Protestant. This is not John Calvin's Protestant church that Henry VIII develops. He makes very few changes, calls it Protestantism, and it's essentially very Catholic, which is why the Calvinists in the society, the Puritans, will be the religious minority, will essentially want to purify the church. They see it as being way too Catholic, and ultimately they will be oppressed and they will leave England. There are ways in which this Anglican Church is the only church. You cannot be something else in England, and if you are, you're going to be punished for it. So it is not a place where there is religious freedom of conscience, and the state is in full control of the church. Okay, there are a lot of effects of this. Thomas More, for example, who was a Christian humanist, tries to defend the Roman Catholic Church. He's executed. Monasteries and the wealth are taken. There's a lot of property that is redistributed to people who supported the new monarch. In a lot of cases, this goes to kind of new middle class, some people in nobility. Anne Boleyn ends up being beheaded by Henry VIII, and Henry marries Jane Seymour, who gives him ultimately the heir that he was seeking, the male heir of Edward VI, who actually does take the throne after Henry VIII at the age of 9. Okay, so lots of political things in the background, and much of Henry VIII's reign is going to relate to the power of the king, not only religious affairs, but kind of have an idea that Henry's heirs will take on his role in England, and we see a flip-flopping of either a move toward more Protestantism or more Catholicism, and different people in the society are going to be, happy or oppressed depending on who's in power. Edward VI definitely moves society more toward Protestantism. He will look at the Anglican Church, not change the Anglican Church, but move some of the practices toward greater Protestantism. Some of that is related to the role of religious leaders in the society. Mary, who will follow Edward, who gets known for being, Bloody Mary, has incredible kind of movements toward greater Roman Catholicism. Part of this is because her husband is Philip II, somebody who is seen as the kind of future heir of Spain, and people feel like England could go in the way of Spain. She does attempt a restoration of Catholicism to some degree that leads to a great deal of religious strife, under her. So there's a great group of people who are not going to be happy, and there's a lot of religious oppression in England, both under Edward and under Mary, okay? Even under Elizabeth, it's never a time that there's not religious oppression. This is a time period where we see a great number of witch hunts, so people who don't fit the religion of the state in a variety of these places, kind of are involved in being labeled as heretics and thrown into a river to see if they sink or swim, and tests are made in order to test people for witchcraft, right? And we see some of that in the early American colonies as well. Elizabeth probably is most known for being a significantly strong leader. She does change the role of the national church. She also changes her title from being head of the church to really being governor of the church. So she's really seeing herself as much more of a political leader. Her actions are known as being a politique. To some degree, she compromises. She keeps the Church of England and kind of leads it as more of a Protestant institution, but she looks the other way, maybe at what people do in their private homes, okay? The Catholic Church does take it upon itself in the early 1500s, the mid 1500s, to kind of reform itself. And this is very significant. The Council of Trent, which is not just a one-time meeting, it meets over the course of multiple years. This is really going to be where the Catholic Church decides two really important things. One is that the Catholic belief system of faith and good works is like given the thumbs up. The church does not change the belief system of the Roman Catholic Church, okay? They ultimately do also continue the role of the Pope, believing that the Pope has a unique ability to interpret the Bible. So the Bible and the church authority, continue as being kind of dominant in religious affairs. This is almost like an endorsement of things that were already believed by the Roman Catholic Church. There's also an effort to create kind of an organization of sorts that are going to take an oath. It's almost like a military organizational style where there's a general of sorts who will lead religious people in a religious order that take a role as being what's called a Jesuit at the time, and they are going to go on a mission to kind of inform others about Roman Catholic Church's role. And a lot of this is done through education. So there's a belief that some of the Catholic Church's principles could be established in societies through education. We see this in South America, right? This becomes a place where the Jesuits have a great deal of religious fair control. We also see this in the U.S., right? A lot of schools and colleges that you might even attend, Georgetown, for example, are known as Jesuit colleges, right? Their origins have roots in the Jesuits. So there's this huge kind of movement. We see it in China, we see it in India, we see it in the New World, where the Jesuits kind of bring some of the word of the Roman